Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are tackling a paradox that is, honestly, a little mind-bending when you stop and think about it.
It really is.
We live in an age of absolute, unprecedented connectivity. I mean, think about it. You can FaceTime someone on the other side of the planet while you're walking your dog. You can transfer money in seconds.
We have access to more theological resources, more libraries, just in our pockets than, previous generations had in their entire lives.
Exactly. And yet, and this is the paradox that really drives our source material today, the disparity between those who have access to the gospel and those who do not is wider than it has ever been in history.
It's just a jarring reality when you put those two things side by side.
It is. We have all this tech, all this wealth, all these resources, and yet there are millions, hundreds of millions of people who have literally zero access to the message of Christianity.
And that's really the heart of the manuscript we're diving into. It's titled Go Where There Is No Gospel. And honestly, it functions as a manifesto, a kind of wake-up call for missiology, which is just the study of missions and church priorities.
It is definitely not a light read, but it feels like a necessary one. The source frames this whole discussion around a concept it calls unfinished obedience and the gospel gap.
Right.
And the mission for this deep dive is to figure out why the author claims the greatest crisis facing the church today isn't what you might think. It's not persecution. It's not hostile governments.
No, it's not external at all. The source argues that the greatest enemy of the mission is internal comfort.
Comfort. That's the villain of the story. That feels, well, uncomfortable to hear.
In this context, yeah. The argument is that comfort has essentially redefined what it means to be faithful.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because usually when we think of a crisis, we think of something burning down, emergency sirens. But this text is arguing the crisis is that things are too cozy.
Precisely. And this is where the author gets really nuanced. The core argument is that comfort disguises itself. It doesn't show up looking like laziness or apathy.
Because if it did, we'd spot it.
We'd spot it and fix it. Instead, it shows up looking like wisdom. It looks like stability. It looks like sustainability.
Oh, that's a big one. Sustainability.
It is. And the text points out a historical pattern. The church often grows clearer and purer when it's under pressure. Think of the early church persecution in Rome. But when it's surrounded by ease, it gets distracted. It gets diluted.
So because we aren't fighting for survival, we start focusing on, what, the color of the carpets?
In a spiritual sense, yes. The questions the institution asks begin to change. Instead of, are we aligned with God's purposes no matter the cost? The church starts asking, is this safe? Is this efficient? Can we sustain this without too much risk?
I see. It's the shift from mission to maintenance. You stop trying to take the hill and you start just trying to keep the bunker tidy.
Exactly. The source material uses this really striking phrase. We have become skilled at gathering, but hesitant at sending.
Gathering versus sending.
We can organize an amazing service, refine our programs, build great community centers, and the text is careful to say those aren't bad things. But when gathering, the numbers, the building, the programs, when that becomes the primary measure of success, going becomes secondary.
That feels so counterintuitive, though, doesn't it? I mean, usually if a community is stable and growing and has a nice building, we view that as a sign of success. We say, look at that thriving organization.
And that's the trap. The text calls this the paradox of proximity.
Yeah.
Keeping your resources, your people, near familiar structures. It feels responsible. It feels like good stewardship.
Right.
But going to where the gospel is completely unknown, that feels risky. That feels irresponsible to the budget. But the author argues that this logic is actually unfinished obedience.
Unfinished obedience. So we affirm the mission in theory.
Theologically, yes. We say, yes, go into all the world. But we postpone it, practically. We put it on the someday list.
And someday never comes.
Right? Someday usually means after we've finished making everything perfect here, which, of course, never happens.
So to really get why this is such a problem, we have to look at the theological foundation the source lays out. This isn't just about bad strategy or mismanaged budgets, is it? It's about the very nature of God.
It is deeply theological. The source makes a profound point. Mission isn't a program the church invented to get more members. It originates in the character of God.
Okay.
The text traces this right back to the beginning. Think about Genesis. After humanity falls, what does God do? He doesn't wait. He seeks. His first question to Adam is, where are you?
He's the initiator. He doesn't sit back on the throne waiting for an apology to arrive.
He is a seeking God. And then you look at Abraham. God calls him to leave his security, his home, his land, everything that defined him, not just for his own sake,
but to bless all families of the earth. It's always outward.
always outward. And the ultimate example, the real linchpin of the argument, is the incarnation.
Jesus himself.
Right. The text describes Jesus as the ultimate missionary. He crossed the greatest possible boundary from divinity to humanity. He didn't stay in the ultimate comfort of heaven. He entered into the suffering of the world.
That puts a different spin on it. If you claim to follow Jesus, you're following a missionary who left home.
Exactly. The source breaks it down into this Trinitarian pattern.
Mm.
The Father sends the Son, the Father and Son send the Spirit, and the Spirit sends the Church. So if the Church isn't sending, it's actually acting against its own DNA.
The text actually calls a non-missional Christianity a contradiction.
Yes. It argues that mission isn't a department. It's not like the HR department or the maintenance department of the church.
It's the whole point.
It's the fundamental identity of the church. It's why the church exists. If it stops sending, it stops being the church in a biblical sense.
That is a heavy realization. So let's pivot from the theology to the reality on the ground, the who and the where. We mentioned the gospel gap earlier.
Right.
The source gets pretty specific about the geography of this gap. We hear terms like the 1040 window. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. The 1040 window, it refers to a rectangular area of the globe, roughly between 10 degrees north and 40 degrees north latitude.
And that covers.
It encompasses North Africa, the Middle East, and a huge part of Asia.
So what makes this area so significant in this context?
It's where you find this intersection of three major challenges: religious resistance, political instability, and deep poverty. But the defining characteristic, according to our source, is that this is where the vast majority of unreached people live.
Okay, we need to clarify that term, unreached, because I think people hear that and they think, oh, people who decided they don't like Christianity, or maybe just people who haven't been to church in a while.
That is such a crucial distinction. The text is very clear. Unreached does not mean people who have heard the message and rejected it. It means people who have never had a meaningful opportunity to hear it in a way they can understand.
So they don't have a church in their neighborhood.
Or a Bible in their language. They don't personally know a single Christian.
That's a huge difference. Rejecting a message is one thing. Never having access to it is completely different.
It's the difference between starving because you refuse to eat and starving because there is literally no food in your village. The source argues we spend 99% of our resources trying to convince the person who's refusing to eat while ignoring the village with no food.
And this all connects to the Greek word ethne, right? From the Great Commission.
Yes. When the Bible says, make disciples of all nations, the word used is ethne. We tend to think of nations like modern political countries, France, Brazil, Kenya, lines on a map.
But that's not what it means.
No. Ethne refers to ethno-linguistic people groups. So tribes, castes, clans, distinct cultural groups.
So a country like India.
India is the perfect example. It's one nation politically. But inside India, there are thousands of distinct ethne. So the source points out that you can have millions of Christians in India, and there are, the church is growing there, but still have hundreds of unreached ethne within that same country who have zero access because of language or caste barriers.
That really changes the map, doesn't it? You can't just color a country green and say, job done.
No, you can't. And that's why the source frames the gospel gap as the world's greatest inequality. An inequality of access to what it calls eternal truth, determined entirely by where you happen to be born.
Which leads us right into the next major point the text makes, which is about the barriers to closing this gap. We touched on comfort, but the text gets more specific and calls out the idol of safety.
This is where the text really challenges modern cultural values. I mean, we live in a world that idolizes safety. We ensure everything. We mitigate every risk.
Right.
And the source argues that the church has adopted this exact mindset. We view risk, financial, cultural, physical, as something to be avoided at all costs.
But surely safety is good? I mean, nobody wants to be unsafe.
Well, of course. But the source argues that when safety becomes an idol, it prevents obedience. And paradoxically, the gospel actually spreads fastest.
Where?
On the margins.
Exactly. Through suffering, not through surplus and safety. The paradox of growth mentioned in the text is that the church historically expands most dynamically when it's under pressure, not when it's comfortable.
It talks about the credibility of suffering.
Yes. The argument is that a gospel proclaimed without cost. It risks being received as just a theory. If I come to you with a message that requires nothing of me, I'm comfortable, I'm wealthy, I'm safe, why should you believe it requires anything of you?
But when the messenger suffers for the message...
That grants credibility. It shows it's worth something.
The text lists some intense examples, the early martyrs, William Carey. But the one that stood out to me was the Moravians. Oh, the Moravians are the classic example of this costly obedience. In the 1700s, two young Moravians heard about the plight of enslaved people in the West Indies. They wanted to go preach to them, but the slave owners wouldn't allow it. So, according to the accounts, they offered to sell themselves into slavery, to literally become slaves just to get proximity to the people they wanted to reach.
That is, I mean, that just stops you in your tracks. That's a level of commitment that makes our modern sacrifices look pretty small.
It's what the source calls a theology of loss. Reframing loss not as failure, but as investment. If you lose your safety, your comfort, or even your life for the mission, the world says tragedy. The source says witness.
That is a hard pill to swallow in a culture that celebrates living your best life.
It is, but the expert analysis here implies that living your best life might be the exact opposite of the obedience the text is calling for. The text challenges you, the listener. Are you trying to preserve your life or spend it?
So we've diagnosed the problem: comfort, safety, a misunderstanding of the mission. How does the text say we move from vision to action? What are the strategic shifts?
Well, the first shift is toward what the text calls incarnational ministry.
Which means?
It means presence. It's not just broadcasting a message from a satellite or, from the internet. It's living among people, learning their language, understanding their culture. The text uses the phrase, long obedience in hidden places.
I love that phrase. It sounds so unglamorous, but so necessary.
It is unglamorous. It means showing up and staying. But linked to that is the goal. The goal isn't just to have missionaries there forever. The goal is indigenous leadership.
This touches on avoiding those old colonial patterns, right? We aren't trying to export Western culture.
Absolutely. The source is very firm on this. The gospel hasn't truly arrived in a culture until it is owned by the people of that culture. It's not about exporting Western church styles or architecture. It's about planting the seed of the gospel so it grows in local soil.
So the win isn't we built a church there. The win is they're leading their own church there.
Correct. When indigenous leaders can sustain the faith and propagate it and even theologize in their own context without external dependency, that is success.
What about the local church back home, the one asking, is this safe? What's their role in this strategic shift if they aren't the ones physically going?
The source argues the local church needs to stop being a spectator. It shouldn't just be the place where you go to consume religious content. It needs to be a sending base.
A launch pad.
Yes. And that requires practical shifts. It means looking at the budget. Are we spending everything on ourselves, on better lights and softer seats? Or are we aggressively budgeting for the unreached?
And prayer, I imagine.
It means prayer. Are we praying for specific ethne by name? And it means training. Are we raising up disciples who are ready to go or just disciples who are ready to sit?
It's shifting from a consumer mindset to a producer mindset. Or a soldier mindset, maybe.
Exactly. A shift from what can the church do for me to where is the church sending me?
There's one more layer to this strategy that I found really compelling. It's the time frame. The text talks about thinking in generations.
This is the antidote to our instant gratification culture. We love metrics we can measure in a quarter, how many people showed up, how many clicks did we get. But reaching unreached peoples is slow work. Bible translation, for example, can take decades.
Decades. That's longer than most career paths.
Exactly. The source discusses legacy versus immediacy. Are we willing to plant trees that we will never sit under? Are we willing to do the hard soil-tilling work so that a generation 40 years from now might see a harvest?
It's asking us to detach our ego from the results.
Precisely. If you need to be the one to get the glory for the harvest, you probably won't do the hard work of breaking the ground in an unreached place. The text asks a haunting question. What will we be remembered for?
Wow.
Will history look back at this generation of the church and say, wow, they were really sophisticated and comfortable? Or will they say they were faithful to the unfinished task?
That's the history's verdict aspect. It forces you to zoom out.
Yes. The source suggests that faithfulness is the only legacy that matters. And faithfulness is measured by obedience to the command to go, not by the comfort of the stay.
So let's bring this all together. We started with the paradox of connectivity and the gospel gap.
Yeah.
We looked at how comfort has redefined faithfulness, turning us inward toward maintenance.
Right.
We explored the theology of ascending God and the reality of the unreached ethne. And we've seen that safety is an idol that keeps us from the margins where the gospel is needed most.
It really all comes down to a choice between gathering and going. Gathering is comfortable, it makes us feel good, it's visible. Going is costly, it's often invisible, and it requires a surrender of safety.
It's that unfinished obedience. We've done the easy part. We haven't done the hard part.
And the source leaves us with that final provocative thought. If the gospel is truly good news, if it is the power of God for salvation, as the text claims, what justification is there for keeping it within the boundaries of where it is already known?
If it's for everyone, why are we hoarding it?
Exactly. It forces you, the listener, to confront your own definition of success. Does your definition of a successful life align with the source's definition of obedience?
That is a question I think we're all going to be chewing on for a while. It's not just about geography, it's about the posture of our hearts. Are we closed off in comfort, or are we open to being sent?
And remembering that being sent doesn't always mean crossing an ocean, but it always means crossing a barrier. It always means leaving comfort behind.
Well, that is a lot to process, but that is what we do here. We dive deep. We hope this challenges you to look at your map, both the world map and the map of your own life, a little differently today. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
Until next time.